Boo! Welcome to Screenfish Radio. I'm so glad that you could join us this week for a special Halloween episode where we're going to talk about Halloween Kills. And this week, I am so thrilled to bring in a couple of horror experts, Alan Chabot and Catherine Erskine. Welcome, everybody. I am so glad you're here.
Thank you.
Halloween Kills is the sequel to the reboot of the long-standing franchise, and the nightmare isn't over as unstoppable killer Michael Myers escapes from Laurie Strode's trap to continue his ritual bloodbath. Injured and taken to the hospital, Laurie fights through the pain as she inspires residents of Haddonfield to rise up against Myers. Taking matters into their own hands, the Strode women and other survivors form a vigilante mob to hunt down Michael and end his reign of terror once and for all. As always, this podcast is rated S for spoilers, but let's dive right into you both. What did you think of Halloween Kills?
The problem when it comes to reviewing this kind of movie is because it is part of a larger story. So I have a hard time separating it as an individual movie, only for the fact that it doesn't feel like a standalone.
Sure. It's a middle. It's a
middle movie. So I mean, I feel like I can't look at it as, this is just a movie by itself, because then I would hate it. Because it wouldn't make sense. You have so much that you're missing from the beginning and the end kind of thing, in some forms. But I feel I liked it. It definitely was a good middle movie, but I also feel like it could have ended earlier than it did. Only for the fact that I feel like they could have used him getting back up in the beginning of the next one to kind of like really pull it, rather than just kind of ending it. I mean, like, I don't know if they were trying to do just a different ending, but I just feel that it could have ended earlier, and then they could have just been like, hey, we'll do this now at the beginning of the next one. So at least it ties in the night still, because even if they do a time jump, that's okay, because it's already been done multiple times.
Mm-hmm. So you would have preferred that they didn't end it with the killing of the daughter?
No, I feel like they should have started the third one with it instead.
Okay.
Like give the idea that, oh, they're safe. Right? Like, oh, he's down. If they had just cut it at that point, then you would be assuming, oh, they did it, because that there's still a third one. So obviously, he's coming back anyway. So, I mean, that's kind of the problem when it's a trilogy beforehand, is you already know, oh, he's going to make it then. He's obviously going to make it to the third one, or they have no story.
Or will he? Because they had one without him before.
Well, I mean... Halloween 3, I mean, we can all agree, if we all remember it in some form, was a very ridiculous movie, but we can talk about that later. But what about you, Kat? What did you think?
Well, like, very abnormal for me, I was in the dark in these movies, so I actually didn't know it was a trilogy until I talked to you guys.
Okay.
And then I watched the first one on Monday. I don't know. I'm disappointed in myself for not having more knowledge on this. You know what? It was so funny because before, there's a lot of like hate for it out in the media.
For this
there's
one?
there's a lot of negative reviews. There's a lot of like calls for Michael Myers is now homophobic because he killed a gay couple.
Oh, come on. Really? I didn't hear about that.
I feel like that's equal opportunity murder, but that's just me.
Isn't this more inclusive?
Yeah.
No, I could see that. I
didn't. And I feel like I'm pretty like, I don't know. I did like it in the sense that like it was really nostalgic and it really ties you into the first movie. I don't want to say I'm a bit of a purist, because the Halloween movies are nothing but inconsistent, and they're all written by different people. They're all over the place. So I think my major issue was that it wasn't consistent with the early 80s movies that I saw. Like, I was upset that Laurie is now magically not Michael's sister anymore. But I mean, that only came out in Halloween 2, but for some reason that stuck with me as a a motive point, right? Like this kid was insane, killed his older sister, the entire family, and was put away and then escapes to finish the job. Like that's the modus operandi, right? So it's like, okay, this gives it motive. This ties in a neat little bow, the whole serial killer aspect. And then they just took it away. And I was like, excuse me? Like, you're just going to be like, oh yeah, by the way, that was just something that people made up. And I was like, no, it's not.
It didn't happen.
And then when I think about it, because I was reading an article about like Jamie Lee Curtis talking about it and how the director had almost like regretted tying in the sibling ship of the Halloween 2. Whoever did Halloween 2, I can't remember, kind of regretted tying those two together because they didn't want it to have a motive. But I'm like, no, Halloween 2 stated. But then I also forgot that actually in another Halloween movie, Laurie dies. So really, what is consistency?
Well, there's 3 timelines. I didn't even know there were 3 timelines. Now, I have been a fan of the series since I was a kid. So I didn't realize that there was 3 timelines going on.
It's so hard.
The first timeline is 1 and 2 as the staple, and then the original 1 and 2, and then 4, 5, and 6, which is known as the Thorn trilogy, which delves into the idea that Michael needs to kill all his family members in order to save civilization, or some type of idea like that from what I was reading. Yes. I have it right here, actually. Yeah, it's just, forces a person to kill an entire family in order to save civilization. Yeah, that's exactly what I had said.
Who knew Laurie was so crazy?
Hero of the story. I didn't realize he was the hero.
I don't find him to be a hero, but I feel like that was the concept they were kind of like driven off of, because then they tried tying it into like a mythology where, you know, why he kept coming back and even more stronger each time.
Yeah, exactly.
But then the second timeline is the original 2 again, but H2O and Resurrection, which is set 20 years later, and then Resurrection is 3 years after H2O. Like, they kept the sibling thing, but they scrapped the whole need to kill the family members and just went crazy with who they thought they could just get, you know.
Is she in all of them?
No.
Okay, no. She is in 1, 2,
and she didn't come back until H2O
and 8. H2O. Yeah, she was in the original and then 81, and then she came back in H2O, and then she was in well, actually there is talk of her apparently having a small cameo in the third one that did terribly.
Season of the Witch.
Yeah, apparently there was like a tiny little like glimpse of her if you were to look for it, but I don't personally remember it, so because it was a terrible movie and I never rewatched it again. So I don't count it. I don't even own it. I literally just finished getting most of the series. I only need 1 more of them, but I didn't buy the third one, and I'm not planning to. I don't need it as part of the series because it's not part of the series. It literally is its own standalone film. I don't even know why they called it Halloween.
Marketing.
Yeah.
Marketing.
But H2O and Resurrection, like I said, didn't really follow a proper plot by setting it, anew, so to speak. They kept the sibling thing, and they just kept trying to kill each other, if anything. This one, I feel like, is just like, it's its own thing. By scrapping the sibling thing, it's no longer a focus, which means now it's giving this story an idea that, what is he driven by then? Because technically he didn't go searching for Laurie in the 2018 one that came out. He was brought there by the doctor because the doctor was crazy. So
it's true. And this whole sibling thing that I kind of latched on, I guess, is because it follows the general norms of a horror movie. Like, you have the person, you have the reason, like even Jason has the camp issues and like all of that stuff. So that's why he does what he does. But when I was reading an article on this, they were basically like, we wanted to say that the person who the name escapes me, who directed that second movie and said they were siblings, regretted it, and they wanted to go back and be like, this is just evil.
Yeah.
Like, this is just how it is. There's not always a reason or a motive, and that's the scariest part of it. So I was like, ugh, I get it, but this is Halloween. Like, take that somewhere else. And but I did enjoy it, and I really liked seeing most, if not all, of the original cast members kind of come back to have their moment and then die so unceremoniously.
Not all of them. There's still one
yeah.
kicking.
Yeah, some of them were.
She hid like the smart thing to do, you know, especially, you know, you have no weapon, nothing to do, you know,
Right.
outnumbered. What are you going to do?
Well, what you're going to do is you're going to take a gun and get hit by
and
a
shoot yourself.
We'll get
dumbest
to that,
kill
sure.
scene ever. I'm just going to say that right now.
No, if anyone holds me up, if
that
I
anger, I yelled at the
that's
screen. Oh my God, that pissed me off. That was a cop-out death right there. Like, it was just, we don't want to deal with her, so why don't we just have the door hit her and she's dead? Like, let's just cut her there. Like, don't even give her a chance to run, scream, or anything. She's done, you know?
And I hated the fact, I liked the story part of like her raising her daughter kind of crazy, and like almost like what are those people called?
Oompa Loompas?
No, like the preparers, like for the end of the world.
Doomsday?
I know what you're talking about, but what are they?
Doomsday preppers.
Yeah,
right?
that's it. Yeah, the preppers.
Doomsday preppers. Yeah.
Those doomsday
that's the
prepper
technical
people,
term.
like, and her having that childhood with someone who's gone through such an intense trauma and has reason to believe that it's going to happen again, but kind of is like the person who cried wolf because, you know, he only comes back at see, that's the other thing. Why? Who cares what day he comes back then if you're not going to tie anything to anything?
Well, right now they're tying it to the house.
Yeah, now.
now.
And also Halloween.
Well, yeah, and Halloween.
And they're like, he could come back any day, anytime. I'm like, no, he only comes back on Halloween. And it's only because they transfer him from insane asylum to insane asylum on Halloween.
Yeah, it's their own fault.
But yeah, it was interesting, and like to see kind of that generational trauma, if you want to put a little bit of a like mental health type thing into it, and her being so opposed to doing that to her own daughter, who probably is why she died.
She had it coming,
right? So that was really interesting to me, and I really like that aspect of it, and Lori getting her like comeuppance. But the daughter, I agree with you that it should have ended in the street. I would have been mad and yelled at the screen, but I would have been worth it. And I think killing the daughter was the stupidest thing he could have done. Like, it has no merit. Like,
compared to all the other endings, I literally have them written here.
Don't agree, Stefan.
All right. Yes.
Yeah, you don't agree? What is it?
Okay. So anybody that has ever listened to this show.
I'm
gonna say, how much merit do you have to disagree with us?
I do not. I will say openly and honestly that I have absolutely no horror pedigree. None. Zero. The only Halloween movie that I'd seen was Halloween 3. That's it, because I hate horror.
It doesn't count.
So much so, yeah,
you didn't see anything.
Count. Alan, for those of you who are listening, Alan picked this film, said he wanted to do it, and I said okay, and I had to go back and watch the 2018 before this one, obviously. And I will say two things. First of all, horror movies are a lot more enjoyable if you turn away at the scary parts.
Depends on your definition of scary. Were you hiding the entire time?
I don't want to see just myself. I don't take pleasure in watching him ram people's heads into the wall over and over.
It's not real.
I don't think we should say take pleasure in, because I'm not sitting there like, yes, smash their brain.
Here again. No.
It's the tenseness and the spookiness.
Okay. But hear me out.
Yes.
All right. I thought, surprisingly, I couldn't believe I'm saying this. I thought the 2018 reboot and this were really, really well written. Really well written. Now, it was funny because when I went to see this, I'm like, it's called Halloween Kills. Well, of course he does. Well, he kills a lot in this one. So, all right. But
unlike the other ones where he merely stalks, but doesn't
even more in this one. It was
stood
like
from a distance. I'm just kidding. He did do
just
that.
so he could murder them. In this one, he just started going into the neighbors' homes and just killing everybody.
He did that before. If you had seen previous versions,
which I didn't, and I don't care to. But
it's a staple. House to House is a staple.
I loved the ending for this one, and I'll tell you why. This was the series' Empire Strikes Back. Okay, this was that middle film that you're supposed to hate the ending, and I don't mean hate it as in like that was stupid. You're supposed to hate it because it's not supposed to feel like it's been resolved.
Well, it hasn't obviously been resolved.
I know. in the second act, you have to put yourself in that darkest possible place, and I thought it would not be a suitable trilogy. I'm not talking about like the franchise. I have no relationship to the previous films. Okay, so this is like you guys, the way you guys are even talking about the film, I feel like proves my point, because every film feels like a standalone film pretty well, or like that trilogy, like you said, Alan, that's sort of dealing with the weird prophecy where it makes him Superman. But I mean, as a straight up horror trilogy, if they know where they're going for that third one, you have to end it in the darkest of place. They weren't going to kill off the kid. They can't kill off Laurie. She had to go.
Not yet, anyways.
Yeah.
No, I agreed. She can go in the finale.
It's fair game in the finale.
Hey, when she was talking about like, I have to go so he can go, I was like, yeah, that makes sense to me.
No, but not
see
again, like,
but it's also been done.
I'm watching this from a different perspective. I'm like, she's not going to go in the second movie. She's going to be there for the grand finale. She has to be.
She has to avenge her granddaughter now.
Well, no, her daughter.
Mommy and daddy are dead.
Oh wait, yeah,
it's all alone for the rest
her daughter,
of your life.
Judy Greer, who I love. Judy Greer. and I saw this, and I knew this was a middle movie. So I'm like, okay, from that perspective, I actually felt like they were writing themselves into a story. The one thing that makes me mad has nothing to do with this movie, and I've told Alan this, and it's the rumor that they're saying the next film is going to fast forward by 4 years.
Yeah, it's time jump.
That ticks me off, because the whole point to me is that it's one night.
Yeah.
I'm like, but the night's over.
Sense. No, it's not. The sun has not risen.
Yeah, it's true.
I mean,
if the sun
it's
rose,
true, but
it's a long
night.
But that's what I thought was so interesting. I'm like, okay. I've never seen a sequel that I can remember anyway that takes place 10 minutes after the first movie. And
no, that was really good. I like that.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. I'm like, this is so then him not being dead would make sense if the next movie takes place 10 minutes after this one.
But the previous sequel that followed it did the same thing, just different storyline.
Okay, that's fair. But I'm just saying, like, this to me is a really fascinating. That would have been if they're fast forwarding 4 years, it doesn't have the same meaning for me.
But we don't know if they're going to fast forward right when it starts.
True. That's true.
They could be saving the fast forward to like their ending.
But if you said to me that you think they're going to cover the pandemic, they're not going to do that in 5 minutes.
They could.
Halloween does the pandemic?
Yes.
No.
And they said they're going to be, COVID will be mentioned.
But
because Halloween will finally be freaking canceled. Because of the pandemic.
No,
that's why Michael Myers has to go away.
Because everyone's already inside. He can just go house to house.
Michael Myers has to go away because he's been canceled by internet trolls. That's why he disappeared.
Cancel culture.
Or easy.
No, but if they do it during the pandemic, I can't remember if they did it in another movie. But like everyone's like, why don't you just freaking cancel the Halloween? So there's not trick or treaters and partiers and like.
It's straight up Jaws. I'm like, well, we need the tourists.
We're going to keep the beach open.
We got to keep the beaches open.
We can't save everybody from being eaten.
The pandemic could be the time where they do cancel.
Where they cancel Halloween. That's fair. I just really thought the idea of 3 movies over one night could be really fascinating. But you're right.
Yeah.
They would have to cancel Halloween, and then they could like the next one is called Halloween Ends. So
Yeah.
it's like obviously this is the grand finale, but until they reboot it.
Mostly
But I would
because
say
in a different timeline.
A new timeline, another one. The multiverse.
Gotta be like 85 by now. It's 2021.
In the reboot multiverse, Michael Myers meets Mike Myers, and we have them in the same sphere.
He crosses over, and all the children that have followed Laurie Strode and all the different iterations come together as one.
No, those witches are coming back.
I want
Yeah, right.
That's right. Okay, so I want to say something. It was funny in our chat online. Kat, you made a comment, and I would like to address or ask that, because you said you don't come to the horror movies for your social commentary. You come to the movies for the bloody murders or something like that.
Yeah.
And I feel the opposite, and I want to know why you.
It was like, we get it. We all know there's evil in the world. Blah blah blah. Like, you know, we all know from the 80s when you grew up that there were 3 things you didn't do if you didn't want to get killed. You didn't have sex, you didn't do drugs, and you weren't
and don't hitchhike.
Yeah, like you weren't stupid and irresponsible, right? Like those were the values you were raised on. You don't sleep around because those people got killed first. You don't do the drugs or drinking because those were the second people that got killed. And then there was a third one. Oh yeah, you never say I'll be back.
Yeah, referencing Scream already.
Referencing Scream. That's all.
Hey, they're having a new Scream
talking
come
about
out.
the way you were raised. You're just talking about Scream.
No. That's every movie. Like Alan, you know that too. Like, and any Freddy Krueger movie and any Jason and any. It was always the like promiscuous counselors that got murdered, right? It was always the innocent, sweet virgin that made it to the end.
Sex was always a huge staple to go after.
Yeah.
And it's true. If you really think about it, I mean, Halloween, he stalked the friend, the people that were having sex. And then Jason did the same thing with the counselors. And then Freddy obviously did the same thing in the dreams with everybody. So,
and then if you were out in the woods, like drinking and partying when you shouldn't have been,
they came too. Yeah.
So like you have this like holy grail or whatever of rules for in these universes and everything, that if you do this, you die. If you don't, and that was like, everyone in my age and generation was like, you don't go to these parties and you don't go into because bad things happen and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, obviously Jason is going to be there. But the whole social like statements and stuff, like I like it in a subtle way. But this was just overdone, right? Like I was like, yes, we get it. Mob mentality. It's so much worse than a serial killer who can be shot and comes back from the dead. Like, we're just like Michael. I'm like, yeah, I get it. And I felt bad for the crazy person. But it was just like so much. Like it was so, I don't know why it bothered me, because I'm like, yeah, we get it. Or maybe it bothered me because it was so real. And because you see it with like COVID, you see it with BLM, you see it with like everything else, right? Like people get so intense, all these Trump supporters, can I say?
Sure, why not?
Sorry to our American friends, but like like this mob mentality.
Yeah.
And it's just this, it's like a plague that like rips through people. Like that guy who they were chasing was 1,000 times shorter, was definitely not Michael Myers, but everyone just wanted a reason and was like, they were killing themselves. Like you saw people like running up the stairs and like knocking people over and like doing whatever they could to get to this guy in the greater good. And I was like, I get it. I fully know what you're saying in this movie, but like, okay, yeah, we get it. We're just like the monsters. And it just, I don't know. I'm like, I came for the killing, not the lesson. But maybe if the lesson was in a bit more of a subtle way, but maybe people need that in your face, you're just as bad as a monster. But you know what, now that even if I'm saying it out loud, maybe for me that is scarier in this day and age than the actual Michael Myers, because I'm like, yeah, that does happen every day. And it's all of these things, like with the police brutality and all of that kind of stuff. Like people just get crazy about stuff, which I mean, they should about that, but I'm saying all of the people who go against it and say that blah, 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 like this is right. You need to do this. You need to do that. But it bugged me. And I felt a little bad for that crazy man. So I guess maybe that's why I didn't like it. I come to the movies to get away and like to go into almost like to get away from the everyday and the stressors of every day. And then that was brought into the movie that I was watching. And I was like, this is my entertainment. This is how I take myself away from what's happening every day.
And you're being brought back in.
And I'm being brought back into it where I just want to see Michael Myers in space.
Well, I mean, it was a hard scene to watch. I wasn't, because I felt like, from his perspective, he's been in the, insane asylum for who knows how long. And then he gets free and he's just trying to get some help. And like, really, that's in the beginning, he says, help me. Like, he just wants some help. And instead of realizing, that he wasn't Michael, again, it was just, it reminded me of like, pitchforks and pointing, oh,
yeah, exactly.
Get him, and, that's what kind of made me think of. And then like him just basically saying like, all I wanted was help, and everyone looking the way that they did in his perspective, I can see why he jumped. Because it was like, no one, I'm at the hospital where people are acting this way, a place that's supposed to help people. And he realized that he had a problem, which is why he ended up back at the hospital. So it's like, because he just kept being chased and poor guy was just trying to get some help. So I just feel like it definitely brought the story into a little bit more realistic version of, oh, look, it's reality in front of me again. Yay. Yeah. But it's true with horror movies, you kind of want to separate, but then you also remember that a lot of horror is influenced by life. Mm-hmm. Like in 1978, when this, the original came out, who were the big serial killers of that time? You had the Zodiac Killer, you had, I don't know if Bundy was yet, or maybe that came later, or what I mean? Like, you had like these, notorious serial killers of the past, if you will, that are kind of influencing this idea of this story, which we've kind of idolized as this new, for 40 years in. And it's, it lines up with something that you can very easily see on the news.
Yeah, it's crazy. And just like the feeling of, and thinking back onto all of this like police brutality and like just hate, so much hate that's been happening in the world over this, and even like COVID stuff, Trump stuff, everything, and seeing these people, I think basically we all are living in it, and I maybe work a little bit closer to it than others, but like seeing this every single day of like the pure evil that is in the world just existing in these people's hearts. And you're right, it was really real, I think. And I think what was even more painful for me was seeing these people get trampled in their fear, and then also seeing like the people who try to help, like the people who are like, no, this isn't the right person, you have to believe me, and they're just so blindly in their mob that they don't realize until after he's dead.
Yeah.
And then you're just so angry at them, and it's like, well, there were people trying to tell you this, but you weren't listening. And again, it's taking me back into reality, which I tried to avoid. So basically, I've come to the conclusion that I'd rather be with Michael Myers than humanity at this point.
But you see, it's funny. Yeah, this is, again, like this, I think, is just different expectations and different desires in horror. Okay. Like in recent years, there's been a lot of horror that I have liked. Mostly Jordan Peele stuff. I loved Us.
But see, they did it so beautifully.
They did. Okay, I see what you're saying there. It's subtle.
Yeah.
No, I agree I could see with the subtlety. But like for me, if I'm going to watch a film like this, the title is Halloween Kills, and all I could think of is I really am not here for that. To me, the film had to feel necessary. The first film, 2018, felt absolutely necessary. You saw the growth in Laurie Strode. You saw a huge change in her, and it was very much an empowerment film. And I thought, this is a necessary reboot. Like, this is a necessary reboot because you're taking a film, you're updating it, and you're bringing in modern sensibilities. And I could see people reading that with him killing this couple as a modern representation of oppression in the same way that it would have been viewed by killing women in the 70s. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say in a more clear way, possibly.
I don't know, Alan, what you think, but I feel like I would maybe disagree in that, because Laurie Strode has always been a badass in all of all of the movies.
She was always a fighter.
She was a fighter. And in horror movie trope, that like it's always like the feisty, like sweet, innocent, like virgin girl, I always want to say, that like makes it to the end. So the girl always does end up surviving.
Right.
Whether by, with their smarts and their wiles, like there's usually like a trick that happens, sort of like how the trap happened. But I do know what you're saying is like that they did always have the bimbo, like quote unquote bimbo girls that did get murdered first and were easily like easily gotten rid of. But you had to have that sweetness and that innocentness, that innocence of not being one of those girls who was like out on the town or whatever. And
we have that here somewhat with the granddaughter in the first, going back to the first film again.
The granddaughter's very much.
You've got grandmother, mother, and daughter all teaming up, and planning to destroy the evil that's been haunting them, right? It to like watching it, to me, it felt very much like the film plays out very much like a catharsis, like finally we've done it. Now with this one, they take it to an interesting level and they make it more about the town. And I thought that was a really interesting, you're right. This idea, and I want to talk, like we've talked a little bit about it, what evil looks like in the film. This is very much a film where you could read something like the Capitol building from January into the story, where they took down the Capitol building, where mob mentality, like you said, we're all evil. It is interesting that the people who are not listened to, again, going to commentary, are the women, and the African-American sheriff. Mm-hmm. It's mostly white men in this mob who are leading the charge. And I thought to myself, see that in that sense, to me, the film felt necessary. To me, it was actually, this is why I say, not as a person who has a great experience in horror, but I wanted to feel like the story wasn't just another, let's have him kill as many people as possible and then stop him in the end. I was like, okay, if we're going to do this, you have to convince me that this story still matters, because you did such a good job in the reboot in 2018. And I liked the direction that they took it. I especially liked, and I know you hated this, but I love the fact that his motivation now is more open. I like that. It's not just a clear-cut thing. This is
I'm such a purist. I'm like, and I know we're talking about Halloween, which is the farthest thing from a purist perspective, but
yeah, I mean, to me, I think that's a much more interesting conversation, where it could be anybody. It just happens to like his motivation has nothing to do with her.
Okay, well,
go ahead.
Refute as far me. As okay, well, it's not really refuting, but
Steve. Go, Alan.
I would say about the nature of evil within Michael. I feel like it's been explored, obviously, in different versions, in different ways, especially in how it's portrayed and how even they do the death scenes. I mean, how he kills, how much brutal it is from one to the other. I mean, Rob Zombie's version, now, I don't know if either of you have even seen that one.
No, I refuse.
Was a very, very, very darker take on the concept of Michael, more showing his as an adolescent. After killing the sister, what happened to him afterwards. There was more of a backstory, a little, I guess, if you will. And they kind of changed the story too, because by the time Laurie showed up and that was kind of happening, by the end of that series itself, she kind of took on his role. She took on that kind of psychosis and was like, took in that evil, and then she was evil herself. But then that was still playing on the sister idea as well. So again, different story, different version. But I mean, I feel like the nature of evil within Michael has been explored in just, is it mystical? Is it a need? Is there, does he make a deal with the devil? Is it driven by something different? Like I feel like in Rob Zombie's version, they more explored him mutilating animals and stuff to portray the idea of evil. Whereas in obviously this series, they didn't really quite focus on that. They're, like you said, they're trying to branch it out now, where instead of it being a sibling focus, now he could be, just this ultimate serial killer that the more you try and take down, the more stronger he gets. I mean, maybe that's what gives him his power. I mean, how do you survive being shot and stabbed and burned alive? And, what the other versions that I have here of, shot, being caught in an explosion, surviving that one, taken to jail, electrocuted, decapitated, but it wasn't him.
I was going to say they decapitated, but
falls into a basement. That was the most recent one. Yeah, okay. So I mean, like, it's just, I feel like the evil itself, I think, is just definitely represented in all forms in this version. Like you said, Steve, with the mob mentality thing, I mean, and same with you, Kat, I mean, like, it's true. Like, I mean, you can kind of see ourselves. I don't know if I would say ourselves, but I mean, maybe like in a sense of, if you were to remove all reason, what is your response? Survival. So immediately you're going to, no, I'm not, like if you're like fighting for your life, let's say, I mean, you're going to fight tooth and nail to survive, I'm assuming. And if you don't make it, then you don't make it. But I mean, at least you tried, right? But that's like your instinct. So I mean, like, I feel like that part of the scene as well is also a reminder of that, the moment you have an idea in your head and you get so locked in on it, all reason goes out the door. And now all of a sudden you're portraying the same idea that basically Michael is. Like, if anything, Michael might even be the form of that, like you said, of that portrayal of evil. Maybe he influences it. Maybe he's like a muse in an evil form where, when you're surrounded by him, you just have the need to kill. I don't know. Like, it's possible. It's definitely a different angle. I feel like this series is trying to do something that hasn't been done. So in order to do something that hasn't been done, you have to scrap everything that pretty much has already been done and then take elements to honor it, but still create your own story. So like you said, I feel like they're branching out, which means it's not, although Laurie will always be, I feel, a focus in some form, it's no longer his only need. He can kill anybody. He can go to any town. He can branch out like a tree
for the past 20 years.
but see, this is the problem here, Kat, is that they actually, I mean, we know this, the 2018, I mean, this is very popular right now, is scrapped all the films in the canon other than the first one. So, I mean, you can say these are my expectations based on what you've seen, but the stories don't relate to where we are in this. It'd be like you watching the new Batman movie and saying, but that's not the way George Clooney did it.
I did that when Tobey Maguire was replaced in Spider-Man. I refused to watch any of them.
Andrew Garfield and Tom Holland, and then
didn't watch any of them. Didn't watch any of them. I was like, well, it's not Tobey Maguire, so I'm done. Purist. Although I will say the most recent ones have been fantastic, but it was a while before I could move on. Yeah, no, and I see it, and then I was like, who are they making this for then? Clearly they're not making it for those of us who have been around for 20 years watching this crap. I mean, like, watching this cinematic masterpiece. And they all had different directors, which was a huge thing too. Like, there was a couple of them had the same director, but like, you're not, I just have to keep telling myself, you're not watching this like linear, like perfect, like Freddy Krueger was boom, boom, boom. Like, there were different directors, I think, for Freddy Krueger too, especially the last one. But like,
well, we know how that one did.
But at least it was more like it's the same format all the time. This is what happened. This was the motivation. But I at first I was angry and I yelled at the TV a few times. So I was like, just brushed off Laurie being the sister like it was nothing. But I do see that, yes, you would have had to reboot it. And yes, you are introducing it to a new generation of fans that may even go back and watch those. Although I wouldn't recommend it because 1979 was not a great time for, what is that called? Whatever. Any type of, I was going to say CGI, but like any kind of
quality of film.
effects.
Yeah.
But yeah. Oh, there was one thing that really made me mad, and it was when he was coming down the stairs. He had just killed the boyfriend.
I was so glad when he did that.
Oh,
that
me
boyfriend
too.
had it coming. Oh my God.
Yes. See, cheated, dead. This is why you have to let people watch these. Raise your children with these ethics. Don't cheat, you're gonna die. Don't do drugs, you're gonna die. But don't be promiscuous, you're gonna die. But he was coming down the stairs, and then they started playing the music and then remixed it into some like non-Halloween. Oh, I lost my crap. I'm like, that is not the music. That is garbage. And then it like faded out and the real music came back, and I was like, okay. It's so bad. I work with a teacher that has, this is off topic, but like I work with a teacher, we work together for 2 years now. And both Octobers, and she does it every October, her ringtone changes to the Halloween like music.
Ringtone? Oh, okay.
Yeah, Michael Myers ringtone. And every time I hear it, it's like a serotonin burst in my brain goes up. I'm like, but when they messed with that music, it was maddening. But I've lost my train of thought. What was I saying before that? I was really affected by that music change.
You're talking about who it made for.
Oh yeah, like who is it made for? You needed to keep some of it alive. And I like that Jamie Lee Curtis always comes back. Like I love her. I go into the screen. I watched all of Scream Queens because of her. And I saw that, you know what, they're trying to bring a newer generation, but they did have those like little nods to the fans that have been there, like the old the original cast members, not all of them.
Paul Rudd was technically in 6.
Yeah.
But he wasn't the original Tommy though.
No, but they should have just brought him back.
The original Tommy, I don't know why they didn't bring him back personally, because like I said, they brought back the girl that was the little girl from the original. Who she was. And then same with the other guy, I believe. I think.
I think
not sure
so
about the
too.
other guy. I think so too, because the cameos were the little girl, the nurse, and the sheriff.
Yeah, the sheriff. Oh, and then so like I did see the nods to that, and I was like, okay, that makes me personally feel better.
But Paul Rudd was asked, but he was busy doing Ghostbusters Afterlife, so he couldn't. The shooting didn't line up or something, so he couldn't do it, but he was asked originally. That's why the new guy came in. So, and I'm not saying the new guy didn't do well, but I feel like if it was Paul Rudd, he has this kind of new status now that I just feel like it would have maybe added to the film in some form.
He just stood there silently.
Or it might have taken away from it because I looked at it and seen Ant-Man. Like,
yeah, that's true. They probably didn't want to deter from this new, obviously, you know, his new popularity. They don't want to take from it, right? They want it to be natural, I guess, in some form. But what I will say about the horror kind of taking a new trend, if you will, is, you know, they're all kind of doing something similar. Like, you know, the new Scream that's going to be coming out, for example, you know, is kind of doing the same thing with it. You know, it's a new take from the original. So the question is, you know, how they kind of incorporate that. Candyman that just recently came out, you know, they kind of did the same thing. They kind of honored the original. They even shot in the same place it was filmed. You know, like a lot of these kind of, you know, redo movies, if you will, are kind of, you know, honoring the original, which I feel you should always do because it's the original, in a right way where they can kind of give it a new refresher, if we will, and just kind of, you know, still pay homage to the originals in some form, but then also bring in these new characters that maybe they could even play around if they, you know, get far, or make it, you know, longer than the next film, you know.
Yeah.
I do respect that. I appreciated that.
Well, I just find it interesting. Yeah.
That's popular now whenever you're rebooting anything, is to try and make sure that the people who are going to see it right off the bat are the people that are already interested in that property. And I mean, you know, Rob Zombie.
You better believe.
Yeah, Rob Zombie may be a lovely guy. I may be a really nice guy, but
you didn't miss anything.
He does mess up stuff. But I mean, yeah, see, it's funny, like all of these things. This is why I think it's so interesting, like the way I saw it, because I saw it with completely fresh eyes. So what I'm looking for in it, my expectations are that, like I said, it's going to be necessary. So I'm fine with you bringing back that franchise. I thought it was really interesting that Evil, the way that they look at Evil, by separating the storyline about him being the sister, or her being the sister, you're able to do much more social commentary. And it becomes like the relationship between him and Laurie now is almost incidental. You're bound by trauma and not by necessity. And I
But
think
that's the thing. Does that not take away from that which is Michael?
Not to me, not at all. In fact, it makes it more interesting.
Like, who cares about Laurie now? Like, go die. Who cares? Because we don't need you to. Like, there's no familial.
But she doesn't die though. So I mean, I feel like, you know, now although she's not the sole drive for him, he's still probably pissed off that she keeps surviving.
And she's not the sole drive for us.
I care about her more now.
I don't.
Again, and I'll tell you why. I care about her more because her story is more traumatic.
That it was a random act of violence. Okay.
I find it so much. No, I'm serious.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
It so much.
It is true. Yeah.
It was a traumatic experience from when she was a teenager, and she could very easily. I mean, that's kind of the route they were taking with it.
And she hasn't let go of it.
And she never let go.
Well, the town hasn't. Of all, which is, by the way, I have to say it's hilarious that they showed the guy's face on TV not an hour before they they pushed this Danny DeVito lookalike off the roof, because in the bar and his face is on TV. Did no one watch them anyway?
Actually, I was going to say something about that. Apparently, there was an argument about a specific shot in this one that was supposed to be only 1978 and was actually from the 1981.
What are you talking about?
There's a shot in the movie of like you said, where he reveals the face and stuff like that or whatever.
No, I'm talking about in the present day.
Oh, in present day.
When they're in the bar.
Oh, when they actually take the. Oh, I see. Oh, right. Yeah. Okay, you're right.
And everybody's watching the TV. Anyway, that's another story. But I think that if he's just out to kill his sister, it's scary. But it's not relevant to anybody else in the audience. It's just about that. But if it's a random act of violence, if it says something more about Michael's mental health issues, or if it says something more about culture, I think that's much more scary. And that's why I think I like it better.
Then you're bringing the culture that we're trying to avoid by watching something scary that has more of a sequential thing that's almost like reduction of anxiety, and you're making it real again. You're bringing reality back into it, and that's what I'm trying to escape.
Yeah, see, this is what I'm saying. You and I are different because that's what I'm going for. I
get it.
There's kind of a thin line between, fiction and nonfiction, because this isn't really, it's a fictional story, yes, but it can be very easily based off truth. So I mean, like, I think that's where the blur kind of can come in is, again, you usually want to watch a movie to escape. But when you're watching something like this that kind of brings you back in politically, immediately you're like, okay, is this a movie or am I watching, the news?
Yeah, because this hospital scene has happened. There have been riots. There have been people trampled. There have been people trying to take over the Capitol building and stuff like that. Like, I live and work in a world of trauma that makes no sense. I want my horror movie to make sense. Because then that almost helps me make sense of the trauma that I'm living in.
But isn't it more cathartic to have life represented on screen? Like, to me, that this is where the conversation really starts, right? This is what we're doing, but I mean, like, it's a way of processing the way the world is operating by speaking about it through these particular stories.
Well, I think Handmaid's Tale would be the best representation for that one.
Yeah, I love Handmaid's Tale. Love that show.
That would be a perfect representation politically of we're 5 minutes away from, I hope not, but you never know.
Tomorrow
being
morning
in a
we wake up and
situation
it's
like that. The only good thing about that story is Canada's the safe zone, so we're already good.
You know what? That's amazing because I love Handmaid's Tale. I'm like, wow, this, but again, that's future thinking, right? Like, wow, this could be happening. Like, this could be our future. That's scary.
Well, a lot of themes are already happening. That's why I'm saying, like, we're not too far off. I mean, women losing part of their rights in the States would be an example.
Exactly.
You know, I'm sorry to say, but, you know, homophobia and transphobia and, you know, that sort of, you know,
ageism and
like discrimination, like just different reasons you're eliminating people. I mean, like, you know, I definitely feel that a lot of shows and movies nowadays kind of throw in little political nods, if you will. Maybe this was one, maybe it wasn't. We may be overreading it. I don't know, but I mean,
no,
it was pretty. That was pretty in your face.
I feel like it was definitely meant to. It's meant to probably make you get upset and question it, because unfortunately, if you're noticing how real it is, then you're realizing what's wrong with it.
And that's the
then
thing
you should be realizing what's wrong with the situation as a whole. You're looking at these people after this guy dies and you're thinking, you know, you're awful. You deserve to have Michael coming after you at this point.
That's how I feel.
But at the same time, it's also a reminder of saying, like, okay, but look how easy you switch, you know? And that's maybe the point.
Kind of where it comes from.
And now you're seeing, okay, you know, you have the angle of both the killer and the victim.
And who's actually worse? Like,
who is better? Is there a right to any scenario? I don't think so. I mean, I don't think taking a life ever should be a right. You know.
But you do have that. You have the fact that, like, listen, Michael Myers is this deranged killer who can withstand getting shot and like all of these things. But you're like, well, he's a psychopath. But it's like, but you're not a psychopath and you're worse than he is.
And then even if you do defend yourself, you're still risking still being traumatized, because again, you're going to have this different conscious level of, oh my God, I just stabbed this man because I have to try to save my life. And although there's merit behind it, you're still going to be remembering, oh crap, I just stabbed somebody. And, you know, is that something that's going to change you? Are you going to be now, do you feel like you're now, you know, a killer in some form because you've now had to defend yourself in this way?
You know what's interesting is that when we were talking, and maybe I'm rambling, sorry, my cat's yelling, is that we live in a day and age where there are a lot of people that struggle with anxiety and depression.
Not now.
And we live in a world of anxiety, depression being like huge parts of our society. And then there's been an article and many a study done on the fact that people with anxiety, with depression, with panic disorders love horror movies. And it's because it's almost like they love horror movies and they love watching the same thing over and over again, because there's predictability and there's a knowledge of what's going to happen and what's going on. And you get that almost like cathartic scare and that thing, but you know what's coming and you know what's happening. And I think maybe that's why we're bringing the political stuff into it. Like this mob mentality kind of adds a little bit of anxiety, because you're like, okay, well now it's unpredictable horror and it's unpredictable. And yes, it says a lot and it's like, it speaks to the social conscience, but I think that's why maybe people try to escape in horror, because it's like, this is predictable. This is scary, but on a controlled level. Whereas like bringing in the social things that are happening today can add a different depth and dimension that is really great, but also, I don't know why I think maybe the escape is not happening.
I think that's interesting. That's an interesting point. And you know, I'll again though, coming back to like bringing in the realities of our culture through this. To me, it's no different than sci-fi. Horror is, to me, the same type of thing as sci-fi does it all the time. All the time, they bring it in, combine cultural conversations, but it feels distant. So I could understand maybe it feeling close because it feels like this is my world. I could see that. I think the reason that I find this so interesting is it's beyond, like, remember we went through that phase where it was like torture porn. and it was like, how gross.
Yeah, all the Saws and the Hostels. Yeah, I never ever watched those.
But it was like, how gross can we get? How violent can we get?
Yeah.
And we sort of moved away from that now, and it's like, okay, let's talk about things, but let's do it with these things that we're familiar with. And that to me is very interesting. I had no interest in seeing films like The Hills Have Eyes or Saw or anything like that. I didn't. But this strikes a different chord. I want to spin a little bit here. We got to start wrapping up soon. But I think
sorry, I could talk all night.
No, I love this. This is great. But Laurie's last speech is really interesting. Right before her daughter dies, Laurie says, "I always thought Michael Myers was flesh and blood, just like you and me. But a mortal man could not have survived what he lived through. The more he kills, the more he transcends into something else impossible to defeat. Fear. People are afraid. That's the true curse of Michael. It is the essence of evil, the anchor that divides us. It is the terror that grows stronger when we try to hide. If they don't stop him tonight, maybe we'll find him tomorrow or next Halloween when the sun sets and someone is alone. You can't close your eyes and pretend he isn't there, because he is." To me, that
was brilliant.
I think it's a really fascinating speech, and the idea of using fear. The real evil here is the fear of Michael, or of this mob. The fear is what's driving the mob. The fear is what drives Michael, and he feeds off of that, and it gets worse because of this fear. I just find that really, really fascinating. I would love to know what you think.
Well, I'm thinking Freddy Krueger.
That's what I said. They did that with Freddy.
That's true. Fear is kind of Freddy's thing. So unless they're doing either
get away from fear, Michael.
Well, no, I mean, if they were to do like a Michael Myers versus Freddy versus Jason, I mean, that'd be quite the battle. But I just feel like the fear, I'm not saying the fear concept isn't, being portrayed. I definitely feel it is, but I just feel like when I think of fear, now I'm jumping over to Freddy. I'm not thinking of Michael. Like, I'm not saying that Michael isn't fearful. I'm just saying he's more scary and menacing and, can show up at any point and anywhere, versus Freddy, whereas he can show up when you're sleeping. So
what are you afraid of with Michael? Or sorry, what are you afraid of with Freddy?
Well, Freddy is entering he's entering an unconscious part that technically you don't always have control of. Exactly. So when you don't have control, and obviously they're expanding on the idea that if you die in your sleep, you die in real life. So I mean, again, that makes it even more scarier. I mean, like, people always worry about dying in their sleep, thinking that they're not going to wake up. Is that there any truth to that? I don't know. I mean, I've had some pretty close calls, but I'm still here. So I mean, and that was just a dream.
And it's something that you can't control, and that everybody needs is sleep, right?
Exactly.
Like you see when people try to stay awake to avoid it, they end up going crazy, and they're actually asleep when they're going into delusion almost.
So if anything, I think that, it's definitely, it all kind of ties back to each other. Like, they all kind of do that with one another. And I think it's because, they all kind of have influenced each other. I mean, if you really think about Halloween, Jason and Freddy, they were the three staple horrors that kind of went up against one another. So, I mean, they were kind of like the early days of Marvel, where it was like, oh, Fox versus, there you go, Fox versus Marvel, or DC versus Marvel, like, it's that separation kind of, competitive, so in horror world, they were the three staples that you didn't want to mess with. And if you did it wrong, then you'd be reminded. So, I mean, Freddy, they tried that failed. Friday the 13th, they tried that, but that's been in legal battle for the last 10 years. It just came out of it. So expect a new one probably soon. But now that they're kind of rebooting and retaking on the original movies or horror movies now, and either doing a TV series or a rebooted film, anything's possible with these other franchises. They could take the same kind of effect. Now, Robert Englund is going to be really hard to replace. I personally think he's the best Freddy I've ever seen. So, I think the problem with rebooting is if you get it wrong, then, you know, unfortunately it doesn't bastardize the entire series, but unfortunately it's still something you remember. You don't forget. Like, you know, Jason, for example, going to space. No one's ever going to forget him walking in slow motion in space from an explosion. That, you know, like, it's just, I know it's not relevant to this conversation. I'm just saying that, like, you know, it's one of those horror staples that you're like, oh, I remember when that happened. Yeah, that was stupid. But I mean, does it take away from the series as a whole? Well, no, because I mean, the series as a whole, it still kind of stands on its own. You know, Jason is still Jason, you know, and then him coming into movie with, you know, Freddy for that version anyways, that was just brilliant, if you ask me. So, I mean, if they were to bring Michael in or something, or bring all the horror characters in some way, oh, I'd see that movie.
Yeah, and I had the same feeling, like, as they were talking about that fear and that fear and that fear, and like, he is fear. I'm like, okay, well, that's Freddy Krueger. That's not Michael Myers. But then that puts it into the fact that I still had connected it to Laurie being a sibling and there being a motive and all of that, which even with Freddy Krueger, there's a motive. But what I mean is that what Laurie's speech was brilliant, and it was, what was said was brilliant for this movie, you know, for this trilogy. Like, right. Yes, if you're going to say that Michael Myers is not coming after the family, like, you know, home/sister, and he's just fear itself, then yes. And if you add it with the whole mob mentality thing and what happened at the hospital and the pitchforks and the bats and everything, and them trying to kill him and just being blind with fear, as we are in today's society, which again brings us back into reality, then yes, her speech was brilliant for this piece of the trilogy that they're trying to sell you, which they do well.
Yeah,
but
it's great.
Not overall. Right? Michael is not fear overall.
I will say, I'm like, that speech to me was so on point to fit the film, because I think we live in a time when our safe zones have been stripped away. That's why I thought safety doesn't exist in the same way that it would have even back then. Like, that's the thing about these home invasion movies. The whole point of the home invasion movie is to be like, is to take away the one place that you have safe, that you feel safe. But we don't feel safe as a culture now. And in the US, I don't think the US feels safe as a nation, being from Canada.
I don't know how safe we feel in Canada right now either. But like, you're right, America is going through.
But it's a fair point. It's a fair point. Wherever you are, I just think as a nation, what it means to be safe, we don't, like, we live in a time where we're afraid. And this is a finale, the ending of this film. And that's why I like that, you know, they made it about so many people. You're looking at, how does a culture deal with that fear? And sometimes our base instincts, when that fear takes over, what do? We rampage. We don't handle it maturely. We rampage, and people get hurt. Yeah. You know, I mean, pastorally, I'd say there is no fear in love, but that so help me, if this ends with them loving Michael and he gets a hug, that could, you know, I wondered that at the end. I'm like, so you can't kill him. Do you have to hug him to death? Like, how does that work?
Bear stare.
Yeah.
Come here.
That's why I love that conversation about fear, because I'm like, man, to me, it didn't register with Freddy because, of course, I don't have the ties. But I'm like, for this film, that fear is what we're it's about what we're experiencing. And I thought that was so good.
I'll give you that. Yeah. For this film, it was well said and well spoken, and for society in general. Two things, I think, for me, before I forget to say them. I think I go to horror for that non-social aspect. Like, I don't want people to think I'm like, like, I'm an airhead. Like, I just want to see the killing. No, because I think it depending on where you're coming from in life, in the least traumatic way to say that, this has something for you, whether you're coming for the nostalgia, whether you're coming for the social issues, whether you're coming to just see a movie that has some really lame chants in it. Evil dies tonight. Evil dies tonight. I could not handle that.
Or an old lady with a drone.
Right?
For some reason, an
old lady with a drone. But then again, that could have been like, oh, they were just chilling and they died. But I think the reason why the social aspect of it took away from the enjoyment of it for me is that I work in a field. My field of work is focused intensely and constantly on trauma and social justice issues in children right now and their families. So I'm having to not only deal with my realities of everyday life and social justice, I'm having to deal with the trauma and behavioral issues that come from that in my everyday life. So I don't want to see that portrayed on a screen. Like I need to turn off the trauma that I work with from 9 to 5 and just have a trauma that's nice and wrapped up in a bow. But I will say, I feel like in saying that, I feel like they did do the generational trauma of Laurie's family really well. Like I really
definitely
seeing that was really good, and I feel like they did it the right way. The only thing that I haven't said that I want to say is I'm so glad there were so many times that they were going to show his face in this movie and they blurred it out, or they like
distant shot. Yeah.
There was one scene where it was like you could almost see half the face, where I was like, too much. But that also goes to make him almost a faceless fear, right? Like we don't know. It could be anyone. It could be any one of us. It could be anyone we know. But or like any neighbor we know. But having that facelessness of him. And also,
well, they did show his face in the original.
Yes, but then we forgot it.
Yeah.
Anyways,
we gotta screen it or skip it. Halloween Kills, screen it or skip it.
Screen it.
Yeah, screen it. You have to.
But watch the first one at least, first, or the first couple, 78, 2018. If you don't, then you might be a little confused.
I, as a human person who doesn't like horror, will instinctively say skip it. However,
the other half,
if you like horror, it's good.
No, two that enjoy horror are saying screen it.
Screen it. Ignore this one.
Yeah.
No, I mean what I said. I would actually watch the third one.
We'll have to, because we're going to have to review it.
We're going to have to do this.
Oh, and also we're going to have to review and do this for Scream, because I have every word of that series memorized, and I own the DVDs. So when that one comes out, we'll have a lot to say about it.
Yes, we will, because I'll be talking about that one as well if you do it.
I will say that a movie that does come out this weekend, Last Night in Soho.
Oh, I've heard good things about it.
Yeah, I've been hearing good things about it too, actually. Yeah.
And it's a horror. It's like a horror, but it's
zombie horror, or is it?
No, it's a ghost story.
Oh, I'll be watching that immediately.
It's not The Conjuring, but it's like this wild psychedelic.
You had me at psychedelic.
No. It's, trust me.
Like psychological?
Yes, and psychedelic, but I want to review that one too.
Okay. No spoilers. We'll
really
wait.
Good. Thank you both so much for doing this. I've absolutely loved our conversation, and I do appreciate your insight, because I know absolutely nothing about horror, and I acknowledge that. But I really, really appreciate having you on to chat about this with me. So thank you. I appreciate it.
No, thanks for including me. It was really fun.
Thanks.
And for you at home, a reminder, you can find us wherever podcasts are available. And if you go to the podcast page at screenfish.net, you can download Fishing for More, a small group questions to help you get the conversation started about the film with people that you have seen it with, because we're allowed to go back to the theaters with people now, so you can actually have seen it with others. So again, to you both, I really appreciate you coming on. This has been a lot of fun. But for you at home, we started the conversation. This was Screenfish.